So the Vessel of Hatred and Season 6 of Diablo 4 have completely overhauled how loot works in the game, but they've added multiple new ways to earn a ton of additional loot and target farm the loot you're actually looking for. And the system I want to go over in this video, I think has been pretty heavily underrated in how much loot you can actually obtain from it and how easily you could target farm the rewards you actually want from this system. And this is going to be the rapport and bartering system from your mercenaries. Now, before we go over the massive amount of loot you can obtain from the system, we first have to go over the rapport system, which is basically just earning experience for your mercenaries and leveling them up. And through this system, you have 10 different ranks. And at the start, you'll earn all of the skill points for the skill tree of that mercenary. Then going through the rest, you'll primarily earn things like pale marks, which are the currency for the bartering system. You'll earn a bunch of random caches of loot. And then most importantly, you'll earn upgrades to the bartering vendor, which consists of all of the bartering you can do for every single one of your mercenaries. And also, when it comes to actually earning rapport or the experience with your mercenaries, it's going to be a bit different depending on if you're in a group or not. So when you're in a group with other players, you can only have your reinforcement, which if you're new to the system, you're basically just applying a mercenary as your reinforcement, and then they'll use a selected ability dependent on the action you select for them to use that ability. So you could just select one of their abilities and apply it to one of your abilities. So anytime it's off cooldown and you use that ability, they'll also use their ability. Now, the mercenary you have as your reinforcement will give you 50% of the normal rapport you would normally be obtaining. So even when you're in a group with other players, your reinforcement mercenary will still be gaining rapport, just at a reduced rate. But when you're solo, you can also have your hired mercenary, so your mercenary that's physically with you and can use all of their abilities. And your hired mercenary gains 100% of rapport, but you still get your reinforcement mercenary while you're solo. So you're getting one mercenary gaining 100% rapport and one mercenary gaining 50% rapport. And this is pretty important because if you want to obtain as much as you possibly can from the bartering system, you're going to want all of your mercenaries maxed out. And also keep in mind the mercenary system, including rapport and bartering, are account wide, so you don't have to go level all of these mercenaries up on every single character. Now, the most important part of the rapport system comes at rank 5 and rank 8. And these will be the upgrades to the bartering system and the bartering vendor. And each one of the mercenaries adds more items and more rewards you can get from the bartering vendor. So starting off at right here, you get the defensive aspects upgrade. So at the bartering vendor, an additional legendary item will be offered and it'll have a chance to be a cache of defensive aspects. And this is how every single one of these upgrades is going to work. At a baseline, it'll just add another legendary item to the bartering vendor, but all of these upgrades give a chance for it to be something else, usually a cache of some more rare or more useful materials or gear pieces. And this one is defensive aspects. Now, this is actually a really big part of the system because the aspect caches just give you pieces of gear that seem to have a higher chance than normal pieces of gear to actually be something that you could get an aspect upgrade from. And these aspect caches give you a lot of gear. I think it's like 8 to 10 pieces of gear or somewhere in that region. And every one of those drops can be an ancestral drop. Now, it seems to be somewhere in the realm of 50-50 to get one ancestral drop from one of these caches. So that's not like getting 8 ancestrals or something. It seems to be around a 50-50 to get one ancestral from one of these caches, which can be pretty good because also, as mentioned, it seems like these items have a higher chance to actually give you an upgrade to your aspect on the item, because every single cache I have opened that has given me an ancestral piece of gear has given me an aspect that I can upgrade from salvaging that item. So just keep that in mind. These do give a lot of gear and they seem to have a higher chance to give you gear that has aspects that'll upgrade your current codex. And then for right here at rank 8, you get the crafting upgrade. So it adds an additional legendary item with a chance of it being a cache of valuable crafting materials. And this seems to be the more rare or higher rarity crafting materials, most of the time just being the rare or legendary quality materials. Then we go over to Variana, and her rank 5 reward is mobility aspects, so an additional legendary item with a chance to be a cache of mobility aspects. Then her rank 8 reward is an additional legendary item with a chance to be a cache of a masterworking materials and obols. That's actually, in my opinion, one of the best caches you can get. Just getting a decent chunk of masterworking materials and more obols is just generally really good, because obols are also really good in the season because you can get a lot of legendary items and they seem to have a pretty good chance of giving you ancestrals compared to the rest of the game, which is what you need if you want to max out your aspects. But then we have Aldkin. His rank 5 reward is resource aspects, an additional legendary item with a chance to be a cache of resource aspects. Then his tier 8 reward is augmentations, an additional legendary item with a chance to be a cache of scattered prisms, gem fragments, and runes. Now I will say this one sounds better than it actually is. Gem fragments and shattered prisms are very plentiful in this season, and it doesn't seem to usually give a ton of runes. It seems to generally give one or only a handful of runes. And then finally we have Subo. His rank 5 reward is utility aspects, so an additional legendary item with a chance to be a cache of utility aspects. And then a boss summoning upgrade, an additional legendary item with a chance of being a cache of boss summoning materials. And I think this is also one of the better caches you want to be getting. I'm not sure if this can give you the higher tier boss summoning materials, so the things specifically for Andariel or Duriel. This does seem to give a good handful of boss summoning mats, so these are, again, always going to be good to pick up whenever they show up on the barter. Now, another really important aspect of the rapport system is after you've leveled up your different mercenaries to rank 10, they then have an infinitely repeatable rank up reward. So every 25,000 rapport they get, you will then get another 100 pale marks. Now, pale marks are just the currency you use at the barter. Now, most of the caches are usually like 30 or 40 pale marks. So just getting one rank up with one of your mercenaries can give you a handful of caches, but you have to keep in mind that the barter vendor doesn't refresh super often. I think it's daily or like every 12 hours or something. You get a free refresh of the bartering vendor, but outside of that free one, it costs 100 pale marks to refresh again. So buying the actual items from the vendor is generally really cheap. It's really the refresh that is going to eat up the majority of your pale marks. And keep in mind, as we went over, every single one of these upgrades is adding at minimum one more legendary item to the bartering vendor, all with a chance of being an additional cache of something else. But all of those legendary items on the barter can also be ancestral, so keep that in mind anytime you're refreshing. Look at all of the actual gear pieces to see if they're ancestral. They may have something good for you. But just the sheer amount of items and resources and materials you can get from the bartering vendor, from the mercenary system, is pretty crazy. And it's even more crazy when you realize this is just free additional loot. If you're playing solo, you have both of your mercenaries, you're just doing the normal things you would be doing no matter what content you're in. Your mercenaries are going to be gaining rapport, and every time they get another one of those levels and you get 100 more pale marks, that's just a bunch more legendary items or bags of materials or bags of boss summoning mats that you can get on top of everything else. So this is basically free additional items on top of everything else you would normally be getting. And I feel like a lot of people underestimate how much you can actually get from this barter. Like I mentioned, anytime you pick up any of those aspect caches, you get a bunch of legendary items you can either sell for gold, get aspect upgrades from, or potentially even just get gear upgrades from. And on top of this, there are ways to get a lot more rapport, specifically anywhere that has a lot more elites. So the pit's actually pretty decent for this because there's so many elites, and a lot of the times for pit runs, you just want to go to the pack of elites, go to the next pack of elites, go to the next pack of elites, and the pit is obviously super good for running in general, best for experience, and you need that to level up your glyphs. But the absolute best thing in the game for also getting rapport for your mercenaries is the Infernal Hordes. I think at a baseline it's the best, but you can also choose some of the Infernal offerings that give a lot better ways to increase your rapport, because just killing any elites increases your rapport. So if you're in the Infernal Hordes, you can either go the best route if you get these, which is go fully into all the Hellborn upgrades. If you can go into those very heavily, that's already the best way to get the most out of Infernal Hordes. But if you can get a ton of those spawning every time they spawn. That's just tons of elites for tons of rapport. But I think the actual best choices, if you're only looking for rapport, is to just go all the way into elites in the Infernal offerings that make the events spawn more quickly. So there's an Infernal offering that the buff it gives you is chance for elites to spawn is doubled, which is already crazy. When you're doing the 10 wave runs, once you're getting to those end waves, you're potentially killing like 100 or more elites in a single wave. So if you have a build that can keep up with that and kill everything very quickly, the amount of rapport you can get is absolutely ridiculous. I think I've gotten 2 full rapport levels for both of my mercenaries with one of the best runs I've done, because just stacking that Infernal offering on top of the one where killing normal enemies just gets the events in the Infernal hordes to spawn more quickly, because then the Infernal horde specific elites will also be spawning much more frequently. So you can just get an absurd amount of elite spawns in Infernal hordes, and that's absolutely the best way to increase your rapport with your mercenaries if you're trying to target farm that a bit more. So all in all, the rapport and the bartering system gives you a ridiculous amount of additional loot if you've gone through, leveled up all of your mercenaries, fully got them up to rank 10, so you have all of the different bartering options, and then you're primarily playing solo because that'll give you just a lot more rapport upgrades and just build up those pale marks so you can just go spend a ridiculous amount of them at the bartering vendor to get just tons of additional loot. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.